Florida State and Clemson are fighting to try to get out of the ACC. North Carolina may soon join them. Do the Miami Hurricanes need an exit strategy?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Conference realignment has been the buzz topic this offseason so far. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and also writer for allhurricanes.com. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're about to be joined by the recruiting overlord. And when Brian Smith joins us, he's brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And on this episode, we will talk about where Miami stands with some of their top recruiting targets because, guys, that June official visit list, it's sick. Miami is going to have so many opportunities to land potentially a top 5 class in the country. But something I wanted to start with Brian. And Brian, you are also my colleague at allhurricanes.com. And, you wrote an article earlier this week. You presented a perspective that most Miami fans do not want to entertain and do not want to hear when it comes to the future of the ACC and conference realignment. And I don't necessarily know if you agree with this perspective, but you threw out this devil's advocate perspective. Could Miami actually benefit as the Power 2 beefs up and continues to get stronger? Is there a way Miami could benefit if they don't leave the ACC?
Less competition in the league. It's straightforward. I know that Miami fans want to play the best, and they by all means should. And I'm not saying I'm advocating for it. I'm just saying It's just the easiest path. Now, think about this. Whether they want to hear it or not, the ACC is in a lot of trouble right now. That's not a news flash. I mean, you're not going and getting SMU, Stanford, and Cal for fun. I'm sorry. You're not. It's just true. But at the same time, they know they're going to lose at least a couple of these. They're trying to drag it out as long as they can, get as much money as they can. It's just garbage in the courtrooms. We all know Florida State Clemson situation. When they lose those 2 schools, and it's inevitable at this point in my mind, if somebody wants to argue that, that's their business. That's 2 heavyweights. The other heavyweight traditionally in the conference is Miami. So 2 of the 3 leave. Who are you going to struggle? Like, just look at recruiting rankings. Besides the Noles and the Tigers, name a school that's in the stratosphere with Miami in the ACC in recruiting.
None.
Right. There isn't one.
Maybe now, Louisville is kind of teased that.
They're in that realm, and they do a great job coaching. Yeah. Louisville, no offense. Would you rather have Louisville as your prime contender? Or if you're like Georgia, would you rather have Alabama? I mean, like, there's different ways to look at, like, Georgia and Alabama probably like it's fun, but who is Georgia going to beat 9 out of 10 times? Louisville. Who are they not going to beat 9 out of 10 times? Alabama. So you have to look at this rationally. And the way this works, fair or not, TV markets want to include every single state as important if they can for advertisers. That's how this works. It's terrible, but it's true. Miami's always going to be a major market. I mean, you've lived there most of your life. You understand that. Mm-hmm. They're going to have a place at the table, but that doesn't mean the table has to be hard to get to. North Carolina, I don't know. They might lead to. So, I mean, the ACC long-term may dissolve, but at least for the short run, even if it was 2 or 3 years, there would be zero excuse for Miami not making the playoff every single year. None. Now, they may end up in the Big Ten or the SEC or something. There's so many, variables that I don't want to guess them. But if Florida State and Clemson aren't in, how would they not make the they would have to fail so badly. Even by the last 20 years, Miami's underachieved a lot, but come on. That you could still play Florida State. It just wouldn't be a conference game. There's so many benefits from it, that perspective. And for the record, I'm not saying I support this because I don't think that it's good for college football because there needs to be more balance, but it's pretty soon it's going to be 2 leagues that matter and that's it. Miami just might be the best program not in one of the big 2, so they got the easiest path. It's ironic, but it's very possible.
Now, I hope people do realize that Brian said he's not advocating for this scenario, because there's a strong counterpoint to that. I mean, if anybody brings up, hey, Miami would be better off maybe being the big fish in the small
Right.
pond in a weakened ACC. The big problem that I see, Brian, and we're staying in the ACC could just be an untenable situation, is regardless of, the college football playoff tie-in where, yeah, it could be easier to get into the playoff, the revenue gap, it's already massive, and I think it's getting even more massive.
That's true.
It's hard to find the exact figures, but I know that before ESPN agreed to this new college football playoff deal, before that even happened, schools in the ACC were set to make about $30 million less annually than schools in the Big Ten and the SEC. And I think that gap is going to get even wider now that in the next college football playoff TV deal, more money is going to trickle into the Power 2 versus the rest. So you're looking at more than $30 million less you're going to make than teams in that Power 2. And yeah, listen, you may be able to get into the playoff, Brian, but then when it comes to actually competing with those Power 2 schools that get there, that's where it becomes a big problem.
It's fascinating. We could talk about this all day because the points Alex just made are 100% true. However, and Alex and I talk about this all the time, text and stuff on the phone, Miami is one of the easiest jobs in college football when they have everything lined up because of location. Recruiting. We can say whatever we want about Mario on game day, and a lot of people pick on him, but he ain't recruiting at a low level. Miami's talent is still sickening going forward. I'm telling you, they're going to have another top 10 class conservatively in the one they're in, and they've already done well so far in the class 26, etc. The kids are just local, so it's not as big a deal to them. And Miami's facilities are good. They've got some elite boosters, so they're very fortunate. If they didn't have the booster situation they did, your point would be even more important. But I mean, like their NIL is ridiculous. They have like the facility, the renderings and stuff, all the stuff they've got coming. I mean, I'm not worried about Miami there like I should be, but it's a private school with some really rich boosters. If any of that dried up, then Miami would be in a very poor place. But 30 million, like it's just, when you say 30 million, then you say, well, that's yearly. That's the other side. It's insane. I don't have access, nor does anybody else in the public. Like, how much are these boosters really giving you? They don't have to turn that in because they're private. So that makes it very frustrating. We can't compare apples to apples, but you would still like to get more of the pie. And it's got to frustrate you because we got a great program, but we're not in this league. And that's why Florida State and Clemson are trying to leave. I get it. So it's unfortunate, but at least short term, I beyond 3-4 years, I would completely abandon what I just said a minute ago.
Yeah, true.
Because eventually it's just like, okay, we're working too hard to keep up and we're still not there. They're doing less and getting more, that's going to grind your gears. It's going to drive you crazy as an administration and coaching staff. But Miami short term, and they haven't exactly been dominant lately. If they can get a way to get into playoff a couple times, who cares?
Right.
They have a great shot, in my opinion, to make it there this year. It's just, you got to go out and win the game. You got Cam Ward, you got experience line, you got all these receivers. They should be really good. Maybe that's the first step, and that would look good too, because Clemson and Florida State are obviously still in the league.
Yeah, and what you're saying about Miami having aggressive boosters, and just in recent years, just becoming a lot more aggressive when it comes to trying to build an elite football program with the resources they're putting in, even going out and hiring Mario Cristobal and really increasing their budget when it comes to assistant coaches and recruiting and all that. All those things also make me feel like there's no way Miami's really doing nothing. Like we're not privy to behind the scenes discussions that may be going on about assessing their options. Miami's been very quiet about this publicly. They're obviously not suing the ACC the way Florida State and Clemson are. Miami's board of trustees meetings are not streamed on the internet because they're a private school. They don't have to, the way that really awkward North Carolina meeting was streamed. And you've got trustees that are, they're auditing their athletic department and they're talking about wanting to leave the ACC. Like, Miami can keep this stuff very quiet in a way the public universities cannot. Now, all we really know about Miami, exploring other options, you go back to about a year ago when the reports came out of that Magnificent Seven, that list of 7 universities in the ACC that had meetings together and talked about the possibilities of, hey, is there any way to break this grant of rights? So at least we know at some point Miami did have interest in exploring other options. Again, publicly, Dan Radakovich, Miami's athletic director, said on WQAM radio a few months ago, quote unquote, we are strong with the ACC. Sometimes you say things publicly that aren't necessarily true beneath the surface. But so we don't really have much hard evidence, Brian, that Miami is trying to get out. But I've got to at least think they have some contingency plans in case the ACC does weaken or if the ACC does collapse or implode within the next few years.
If you think that Miami is quiet behind the scenes as a fan, you are sadly mistaken. I guarantee you there are people repeatedly on the daily communicating with Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia, schools like that have got, let's say, interest. If I remember right, Virginia, North Carolina State, Duke, Clemson, Florida State, Miami. Is that the 7? I can't remember, but
I think that sounds right.
And there's no nice way to say this. Those are schools that hold cachet in either football, basketball, or both. That's just reality. So they know they can go get more dollars. No offense to Wake Forest. They're Wake Forest. It's just true. This has nothing to do with it. I love the whole gamut of like, what can we do and all that. You need to be prepared. That's what they should do. So I have no problem with them looking. And I also have no problem with Miami being quiet. They don't have to play their cards. The advantage of being a private school in this scenario is enormous. But at the same time, Miami still has to have a landing spot long-term. Again, what my proposal was a few minutes ago would be short-lived at best, because the money gap would eventually be like embarrassing. You would take a mental beating on it too, but the financial end is still the financial end. But they is it Big Ten? Like the Big Ten is weird. Like they want an expansion from Chicago to Miami, New York to LA. That would be my guess. I don't think the SEC would take Miami because it's socially, and the coaches would bitch and moan about the whole situation with Miami's got too much recruiting advantage, all that. I think it'd be the Big Ten, but the money for the Big Ten would be insane. It would be such a boom for Miami. Now, how you do some of that, I don't know, with the non-football basketball, the scheduling, that's a lot of flying for athletes. I mean, Chicago, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, all that kind of stuff. That would be really, really hard.
Southern California.
It's really like being a part of the Miami Heat.
Yeah.
You're playing an NBA schedule, basically. You're right. It's bizarre. And I'm not saying you're playing 82 games like an NBA player would, but the concept, you would still play on every area of the country each year as an athlete, which in some ways is good, but academically it's not. How do you fix those things? That's what they talk about. How do we get our athletes there? How can we make it profitable with sports that are already a big L financially? Title IX is not friendly for athletic budgets. So all these things come together. It's just, there's no fixing the Title IX situation. So you have to win with these contracts to stay afloat. And most schools last year were underwater, even at the Power 5 level. So Miami's looking at that too. It is fascinating, and there's so many ways to look at it. It's probably unlimited.
Well, we got the recruiting overlord with us. Let's talk some recruiting. Miami is a finalist, top 4 for Vernell Brown III, one of the top wide receivers in the country. Who else is in that top 4, and when is he going to be making that official visit? Some other top prospects to talk about. I want to get Brian's take on DJ Pickett. If there's anything new with him. Miami's very much in the mix for one of the top defensive players in the country there. So you know what you want to do? You want to keep it locked, my friends. We are only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're talking with Brian Smith, recruiting expert, a.k.a. Overlord here on the Locked On Network. So, Brian, Vernell Brown, a.k.a. Trey, dropped his top 4 on Tuesday, and Miami makes the cut for him along with Florida State, Florida, and Ohio State. He's a Florida legacy, I believe, and Vernell Brown is going to be visiting the U on June 11th. Where do the Miami Hurricanes stand?
I think that Miami's in the thick of the race. I talked to him for a very long time, about 10 days ago at the OT7 event just south of Orlando. And it's been hard because coaching changes, the situation with his dad and UF. His dad actually worked at UF, but they got rid of him. That didn't go over very well with the Brown family.
Awkward.
Yeah. So I even told him, I said, I'll be shocked if you go to UF. And he didn't even make eye contact with me. I just think he didn't say it. This is my own conjecture. I think it's more courtesy. Look,
okay.
I remember one time talking to Dan Dockich about IU. They'd fired him. He played for Bobby Knight and all that. He's like, look, they fired me. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you'll never forget that. So I think Florida has very little chance. Fair or not, they have very little chance. And they're recruiting him hard. Miami is kind of the wild card school. He's been there several times. They need receivers to come into this class, just like the last one. But the visit's going to be important. Right now, from what I gathered from him, I think Ohio State and Florida State are just a notch below or above, and Miami has a chance.
Yeah.
But Brown told me it's really hard because, like, they're all coming at him really hard. He was very honest, very open in the interview. It's going to be close. He would like to make the decision this summer, but he's not positive that he will. That was the other, like, what's your timeline? And he wasn't 100%. And it's grinding on him. And he's a really smart kid. He's got like a 4.9 GP. He's one of those kids that could major in whatever he wanted, be a lawyer or something. But he doesn't know where he's going to make the decision and all that. So it's a fascinating recruitment. He's probably the nation's best slot receiver in the class of 25.
Yeah, you talk about receivers Miami's in the mix with, and they want to get another solid wide receiver class. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about Cortez Mills from Homestead, the 4-star. I really like where Miami stands with him. And then there's a couple of big names that are both going to be visiting the same weekend, Brian, on June 7th. And I like the fact that they're visiting the same weekend as Luke Nickel, the committed quarterback. So he can make his best sales pitch to 5-star Jamie French out of Jacksonville, and 4-star, or it might be a 5-star in some of the publications, Dallas Wilson out of Tampa. Who do you think Miami has, and Wilson is committed to Oregon. Who do you think Miami has a better shot with out of those two?
That's a great question. Jamie is the most difficult kid in the class to figure out. So it's Dallas, I think, will end up at either Miami or Oregon. Jamie, I've known him since 8th grade, and I wouldn't take a random shot on where he's going to go. His list changes constantly.
I noticed that. Yeah.
He's overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed. He's an incredible player. Miami will get their shot. Texas is now heavily involved. Ohio State would love to get him. Like, the options for him are endless, and he's a kid that is a very personable young man. I think he has a hard time telling people no. This just in, Jamie, everybody but one has to be told no. Good luck with that, because he's got about 50 offers. So I don't know where he's going to go. Florida State doesn't think they're going to get him now. It's kind of what I've heard.
Yeah.
It's random. But if I had to pick, I'd say Dallas is more likely for Miami.
I know we cover, Miami recruiting on Locked On Canes, but I can't help but notice what's going on with Cormani McClain in the transfer portal, as it looks like he's probably headed back to Florida. Maybe you've already talked about this with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators, but it's like, I'm hearing he could end up at Florida as a walk-on, which would be interesting for a guy who was a 5-star recruit a little over a year ago to end up PWO somewhere. Well, what's the latest on Cormani McClain?
That's what I heard too. I need to make a couple calls on that. I was trying to think, has this ever happened before? Because this happened in 1 year. He went from the most coveted DB in the country to nobody wants him.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a topic of conversation at the OT7. I talked to some people about him. And one person said, watch out for Florida. And I'm like, okay. Then I talked to somebody else that said USF won't take him right now. I mean, those are polar opposites. Yeah, USF wouldn't take him. And that was, I don't know how accurate that is, But the Florida person, I just assumed scholarship. And then the walk-on thing came up. So I don't know what he did or didn't do at Colorado, maybe both, but he burned some bridges is my guess.
Yeah.
And I think we're all pretty safe in saying that Cormani was playing for a coach that is rather opinionated. Something tells me that did not end amicably, and the phone might have picked up and went around. I don't trust Dion very much anyway because he's about Dion, but like something went wrong because all these schools won't take him. If you're USF, you got to take Cormani McClain. I'm sorry, you do. So something has gone wrong there. I don't know what it is, but unless he got in some kind of legal trouble, but we would see that. Somebody would have gotten that. That's you know what I mean. Like I don't know what's going on, but man, what a talented player. He's one of the most talented DBs I've scouted in the last several years. He's a freaky athlete. I highly doubt he would be a walk-on for long in Gainesville.
True. Well, I want to shift it back to Miami recruiting when we return. I think defensive back and offensive line are going to be two of the biggest focuses throughout the class of 2025. Miami's got a couple of the top interior offensive linemen scheduled for visits in June. And yeah, Miami does have a mid-June visit with DJ Pickett out of Zephyr Hills, who I think is the biggest target on the board, one of the best players in the entire country. So where do things stand? We will break it down with the recruiting overlord when we come back. You want to keep it locked? We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, GameTime. GameTime is literally the only ticket service that I use because I know I am getting the best deals, especially last minute. This is the incredible thing about GameTime. The deals get better on this GameTime app as you get closer to the start of the event. I've been pumped for the NBA playoffs. The Stanley Cup playoffs are going on in my market with the Florida Panthers now in a dogfight with the Boston Bruins. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer you get to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. With their zone deals, you can save even more when you choose a section and let GameTime choose the seats. Guys, the all-in pricing, it's a game changer. You can see the total right up front with no surprise fees at checkout, which is huge. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this Recruiting Overlord episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. By the way, we're available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you like the audio version, video version, of course, free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Brian, Miami is going to get an important June 14th visit from DJ Pickett, one of the top players in the entire country, 5-star defensive back out of Zephyr Hills, Florida. I talked to some folks who are close to this situation, and, nobody knows for sure what DJ is going to decide. He has plenty of choices. I can tell you that he would be very comfortable playing at Miami if that is what he decides to do. He and his family have taken visits down here and really, really enjoyed it. I'm not going to say that this is necessarily a must get for Miami, but the number one player on my board, probably the number one player on the staff's board as well. Where do you think Miami stands with Pickett?
If I had to guess today, it's LSU or Miami, and that's what most people would tell you. Miami's been making a big push for him. His cousin, Booker, just signed with the Canes. He's enrolling this summer. I mean, they're in as good a position as any. And here's why I like Miami's circumstance. And this is just an unbiased opinion. I watched a gazillion of the spring games that were on TV, ESPN and all that stuff. When I watched LSU spring game, I was laughing on the floor. Their secondary was so bad. It's horrific. And that should never, ever, ever be that way at LSU. Guys that were so open, I could have scored. Okay? It was terrible. Something is wrong there. And they're probably the top contender with Miami. I think they're going to flop this year. I don't think Miami will, and I think Miami's a DB away from being an elite program. Well, guess who that guy would be? I'm just throwing out a path for Miami here, but it's the one spot you and I have talked about. We're not sure about how the secondary is going to be this year. They got good players, but they have enough to be an elite group. We don't know. They got a lot of new parts and all that. So the best thing you can do is throw more talent at it and see how it works in the next year. Well, DJ is the most unique DB I've ever seen, and they're putting all their chips in to get him. They can't really do much more from what I've heard about how well they've recruited him. He's going to take his trips. He's going to take Oregon, LSU, Miami, probably Georgia, and Florida State are kind of in it. His dad talked the other day about how they'll probably take trips to those schools. I think they're still on the back burner. But if you take an OV to either one, and for the record, you can take as many as you want now. Terrible rule, but
that's right. Yeah.
So he might take some in the fall, and he's going to decide in the first week or so of October. This is a long recruitment, but Miami right now is, if I had to pick one, I'd pick Miami to get him. So it's just, his list is so widespread. Oregon to Miami. It's really hard to figure DJ out. Yeah. So I'll go see him play this fall and get a little more info, but his recruitment is wild.
And, Miami is, they're in the mix for a couple of the top interior offensive linemen in America. DJ Pickett, by the way, in case I didn't say it, June 14th is when Pickett is going to be making his OV to Miami. Taking a look at the offensive line, Brian, Miami has locked in an official visit June 21st with S.J. Alofaituli out of Las Vegas, Bishop Gorman. He was down for the spring game. I had a chance to meet him. He's physique-wise, he doesn't look like a high schooler. He looks like a college player already. It was his first time on campus at that point, so he's coming back for the official visit in late June. Miami is also getting a visit from interior offensive lineman Isaac Sowles Jr., who I projects as a center. He's going to be coming on June 14th. So where do you think Miami stands with these players? Two of the top and Sowles, he's got an interesting background. I think you've probably covered him in the South. Where do you think Miami stands there?
I think that SJ, by the way, I saw him last year. He was tremendous at the Future 50 event. He was the best offensive lineman there among top players. Tremendous prospect, very technically sound. He's more technically sound than a lot of college kids. The end of his sophomore year, the program he plays at Bishop Gorman's elite. Great kid. Yes, sir. No, sir. Is linear in his thought process and getting better. So Miami was smart to go after this guy. He's about as surefire a guy to end up being a big-time college player as you're going to get. Miami's sitting maybe the top of the board right now. With any West Coast kid, though, I always say the same. I always worry about SC because they have so much pull in Nevada, Arizona, and California. Yeah. That's the school I wonder, it's an easy sell. I mean, it's LA and all that. But Miami's done a tremendous job of recruiting him. And Mirabal, I think, is an underrated recruiter in general. Obviously, he's a very good coach. That's kind of self-explanatory with his track record. Canes or SC, that's my guess. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I know those are two schools that are after.
What about Sowles?
Sowles is harder to pick. He's at Male High School. It's one of the best programs in the state of Kentucky. Miami's been after him for a long time. I think SJ is playing 1A. I think this kid is playing 1B. Offers from around the country, 6'2", 290 pounds, something like that, a pure center. That's one thing Alex really tries to do. He wants a pure center. If you look at the portal, guys that have played it, and you look at the high school, he tries to get center. This is one of the top 2 or 3 guys in the country at the spot. Miami's got him for a visit and been on him for a long time. If they get him, they would get a really good football player and one that's an SEC level guy. He's taken a lot of visits. He's got 5 set for this summer. It's just going to depend on how they go, but Miami's definitely in the mix.
Well, we love it. Always when Brian Smith joins us, you want to make sure you follow him on X at FBScout_Florida. Check out his work at allhurricanes.com. He does a tremendous job there and an awesome job covering recruiting all along the Locked On Network. Brian, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good one.
Love it. You can follow us on X at Locked On Canes. We'll talk to you again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.